Hello and welcome to this round 4 of Pro Tour Guilds of Ravnica. I'm Tim Willoughby, this is Eduardo Sajgalic, and we get the honor, the privilege to bring you the very first rounds of Constructed in what is a very exciting new standard format. This is a format where a lot of cards have gone away, but there's been some very key additions that mean that we have quite the metagame on our hands here, and we're going to see a lot of different takes over the course of this weekend as to where the winning lines lie. And, well, I don't want to leave these guys waiting too long because you know what? Our feature match area absolutely stacked, and we're going to get a chance to see what the deck is that's been picked up by, well, the greatest player of all time. Let's head down to our feature match area for this round 4 of Pro Tour Guilds of Ravnica. Hello and welcome to this round 4 of Pro Tour Guilds of Ravnica. We have our players. They've put away their 40 card decks for today at least, because for the next 5 rounds it's all about standard, and our standard format has an awful lot to offer. In our feature match area, a whole bunch of players that went 3-0 in this one of the over 60 draft pods that we had at this gigantic Pro Tour, but we are going to be kicking things off on our front table with some real talent. On one side of our table, well, there you see Rob Pisano. He is from Team Cardboard Live. He's got over 17,000 in career earnings and is riding high right now in the tournament, but he is facing off against one of the most decorated players in the history of Magic. There you see him, Jon Finkel, member of Team Ultimate Guard, the current Team Series champions. And Jon, well, he's going to be facing down against a card that has been around in Magic since the very beginning, which is pretty much where Jon started out too. Llanowar Elves coming off an overgrown tomb there, immediately meeting a shock from Finkel. On the left-hand side of our screen, Rob Pisano, he's on Golgari, one of the consensus powerful decks in the field. On the other side of things, though, Finkel, he likes his red-blue, and he's gone with Is It Drakes.
Yeah, and here you can see that classic shock the elf, but also Finkel choosing to Lava Coil the Walker rather than playing Tormenting Voice, understanding the power of that card. Yeah,
Wildgrowth Walker, one of those cards that it can get very out of hand. There's a lot of Explore available to these Golgari mid-range decks, and Finkel respecting that, removing it before it can get any +1/+1 counters. Once it gets up to 5 toughness, very difficult to deal with 1-for-1. And for now, Finkel just sort of improving his hand there a little bit with Tormenting Voice, but also improving his graveyard because there's already an Arclight Phoenix in there.
Right, and we're going to see just Jon starting to get to that. Oh, there's another like Phoenix with radical ideas in the hand, being able to discard that Phoenix down the line. But you see Rob missing land drops, which is that Explore. The green-black Golgari decks don't play that many lands because they rely on these Explorer creatures, Merfolk, Branchwalker, Jadelight Ranger, really to power through their deck.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Both of these decks have different reasons that they can kind of cheat a little bit on land. Merfolk Branchwalkers, in principle, there we see it, get you into additional lands. But for Jon Finkel, it's a little bit more straightforward. He just has a huge amount of card drawing in his deck, about 20 cards in his list. Say, draw a card somewhere on there. And that means that you can be a little bit aggressive. I believe he's just got the 20 lands in this deck.
Yeah, and Jon, interestingly, not shocking the Branchwalker in combat or before, but choosing to take the damage and give the highest amount of options, trying to see what Rob would follow up with.
And here we see our first Crackling Drake of the game. A lot of spells already in the graveyard, so that representing a fairly sizable threat. This is one of the things the Is It Drake decks does very well indeed, which is each one of its threats represents quite a lot of damage, kind of forces some sort of answer. And the answer that looks to be coming from Rob Bassano here, still hunting down that 4th land, looks likely to be a Plaguecrafter. I can see one of them just chilling out in his hand there. Forces a sacrifice of a creature, just the one creature in play for Jon Finkel, has to let that Drake go. And in the meantime, this green-black deck just chipping in for little bits of damage here and there. While Finkel's deck can be very explosive, Pisano, he's going to be getting lots of small gradual hits in.
Right, but because of those missed land drop, Pisano is falling further and further behind. And with that Drake on top of Finkel's deck, a second Arclight Phoenix in hand, being able to discard it to Radical Idea, there's a good chance that Finkel might be able to get to, let's see, with Warlord's Fury and the land in hand, that's going to mean 2 Arclight Phoenixes coming into play.
Yeah, I mean, Arclight Phoenix when it's just one of them you're getting back when you play 3 spells, that's a pretty good deal. You're paying the mana for your spells and you're getting a 3/2 flying haste on top. When you start getting multiple copies of Arclight Phoenix back, though, they represent a huge amount of damage. Big swing there for Finkel. And unlike a lot of creatures that come back from the graveyard, if you really have to in a pinch, that Phoenix can block too. It does a little bit of everything.
Yeah, and Rob, having fallen behind, needs here to play a Ravenous Chupacabra, try to catch up. But Jon, now with that Phoenix in play, means that doing something like Find Finality with another land for that Playcrafter isn't going to work. You just decide to let the Phoenix go and get them all back. Rob having missed the land drops means that the Is It Drake's deck essentially has pulled ahead, and I would say Finkel has got an edge here for sure.
It's interesting because when you look at the life totals, it's 12 to 13. It seems kind of even Stevens. They've both got a couple of creatures on the battlefield. Is it just a matter of once the Is It Drake's deck starts attacking, it can get in for so much more that it's going to be difficult for Rob to get back from?
Right, exactly. It's just this Drake threatens lethal damage already. And with that Charter Course on top, it's going to be fairly trivial for Jon next turn to start chaining spells to get back the Phoenixes. So I think Jon's really got the edge here. Rob not able to put pressure. There's not really something that Rob can do here to prevent Jon from flying over for lethal.
Yeah, Vivian Reed at 5, a great way of dealing with flyers and potentially doing so multiple times with just a single card. But there, Rob just not finding the lands that he needed, not able to get everything that he was going to have to put together to be able to face down everything the red-blue deck able to achieve. So our first game in the books for Standard, relatively quick. We will, of course, have plenty more for you over the course of the weekend, including the conclusion to this match. Do not go anywhere. We'll have more Magic for you after these messages. Hello and welcome back to this, our coverage of round 4 of Pro Tour Guilds of Ravnica. We've already had a chance to see how Is It Drake's fares in game 1 against the Golgari mid-range list. And you know what? We're going to get a chance to see some more of that as Jon Finkel and Rob Pisano shuffle up for their game 2. Now, obviously, both of these decks to some extent a known quantity. We've seen them in tournaments prior to the Pro Tour. So these guys will have had a chance to prepare to some extent. As we look to the sideboard, are there any key cards that really stand out to you, Eduardo?
Usually, the cards you would want in a matchup like this, Golgari decks, you can kind of build them to beat one. You can decide, I want to beat this matchup. The question for me is, did Rob Pisano really set up the sideboard to beat? Is it Phoenix? Looking at the deck, I'd say it's hard. It's going to be a very difficult matchup for Rob. The deck, something like 2 cast down, great to deal with these Drakes. The Eldest Reborn also can get some value, but these are relatively, slow. So, yeah, here I think the Izzet Drake's postboard is going to be favored, especially with the dive downs. That's a key card from the Phoenix deck, as well as a Murmuring Mystic, which we might see.
Yeah, Murmuring Mystic seems like a cool one. There's a lot of spells that get cast by this deck. It would be a deck that I describe as having high velocity before you even start looking at maximizing your velocity. It casts a lot of spells. Early doors, these guys just developing their mana base. Turn 2, we see our Wild Growth Walker coming from Rob Bassano. Makes sense to play that before any Explorers, so you can potentially beef up the Wild Growth Walker as well as, of course, buffering that life total.
Yeah, and it's very important for Jon to be able to get rid of this Wild Growth Rocker, since it just gets out of control and spirals out so fast. And yeah, Lava Coil, perfect. Exiles it. You can't find finality that.
Lava Coil, one of those cards that I can see there being some matchups where it's absolutely the worst card in your deck because it can only target creatures, but the times that it's good, it seems very good indeed. That extra point of damage it deals over the likes of Lightning Strike, pretty important.
Yeah, and especially in the mirror match, right? Like, all the Drakes have 4 toughness. Is it, Arclight Phoenix is something you want to exile, not put in the graveyard. So Lava Coil has kind of risen in stock as people are trying to have exile removal in their deck specifically.
Merfolk Branchwalker there. It's Explore, just found lands for Rob Bassano, though he doesn't mind that too much after the last game. It's getting stuck in, ultimately taken down by a shock there from Finkel. And for the Izzet Drake's deck, Eduardo, it's got a lot of these sort of cheap pieces of interaction. I presume it doesn't really mind firing some of them off early just because they do things like powering up this Drake that we see coming along from Finkel here.
Right. There is a line where you want to keep some some sorceries or instants to kind of get back your Arclight Phoenix, and there's a world for that, but it's usually better to deploy them early and then power out those Drakes, as you mentioned, but also start churning for your deck.
Another Merfolk Branchwalker here. Currently, the Explorers all finding land, and at some point for Rob Bassano, he's going to kind of want to turn that corner and start getting extra counters on his creatures, because right now the level of beatdown that he's representing, a little bit anemic, though a Carnage Tyrant in hand potentially will be the thing to turn that one around. The Carnage Tyrant, so good in so many matchups. It's hard to remove, it's hard to stop in any way, and it represents a very quick clock.
Yeah, and I love this play. Let's just hard cast something that's a little better than a Sky Knight Legionnaire. Let's get in there, gets the beat down. But yeah, Carnage Tyrant on turn 6 with not much pressure. Rob is pulling slightly ahead in the race. Jon might have to essentially start staying back with these Arclight Phoenixes. With that, I think the thing that gives Rob the advantage isn't just the race, it's that Memorial to Folly, able to get back a Carnage Tyrant that was blocked. This is really going to come down to whether Rob can draw a removal spell or not. But given time, Rob has a small edge, not a big edge in this situation, though.
So we saw a shock there dealing with the one remaining creature, aside from Carnage Tyrant in play for Pisano. And a second Arclight Phoenix means that, at least for now, Finkel can tend to race. The fact that he's got the 2 Phoenixes in play means that at some point, if he wants to pump the brakes and block, he will be able to trade off with that Carnage Tyrant. And at least those Phoenixes, when they die, they don't tend to stay dead.
Right, they tend to revive. That's why you see a card like Vraska's Contempt being important, right? Gaining 2 life to help with the race, getting rid of the Phoenix. And Rob, with access to Assassin's Trophy in hand, a card that seemed really powerful when the set, got first released, and people were very excited about that card. But then you realize how important and valuable it is to give a land insteader and how resilient a lot of the threats are. And with just, Assassin's Trophy and land, Jon Finkel able to attack for 6 twice before Rob is able to get there.
Yeah, the life total's tumbling on both sides here. The difference being that because Finkel's the one with the flyers, he's got agency on when the blocking starts to happen. He can always block all of those creatures on the ground. The same cannot be said for Rob Bassano, who just has to look on as an army flies over his various team here.
I think with the position here, Jon is likely to get that third Arclight Phoenix into play, or the Crackling Drake. Maybe just cycling here, the Radical Idea, playing the Crackling Drake, and attacking. You could attack with just one Phoenix here to put Rob at 8, and that would be lethal damage from 3 Phoenixes. But you have to be wary of a potential Vraska's Contempt, even though Rob doesn't have it. It's worth. It's something that Jon will have in mind.
Okay, Crackling Drake coming along, bringing a card with it. It's currently comparatively large here. 6 cards there in the graveyard, but though one of them is another Crackling Drake, so currently a 5/4 in play. And just the one attack here, representing lethal next turn. Rob Pisano with quite a bit of work to do if he's going to get himself out of this situation that he finds himself in, as there are plenty of blockers for Finkel here on that Carnage Tyrant if he needs to.
Yeah, the big thing here was whether Rob could draw here a relevant spell or not. The Assassin's Trophy can deal with the Drake cleanly, but that Phoenix being able to block the Branchwalker, if Rob isn't able to draw here, say an Exile removal spell, although that would be game right away, or something to gain life, this might be game for Finkel here, actually.
I love the explosiveness of this Is It Drake's list. It's a list that I've been playing with a fair amount on Arena, and it's just the sort of thing that you're never completely dead, especially if you've got maximized velocity in your deck. Sometimes you can pull wins out of absolutely nowhere. Here comes that Assassin's Trophy to deal with Crackling Drake. Jon Finkel will get a basic land that he gets to put onto the battlefield in return for the trophy.
Yeah, with another removal spell, Rob can just attack for lethal, but it doesn't appear to be the case since Rob would have just played the removal spell. And let's see. With Finkel having access to Radical ID in the graveyard and so much mana, it's really, can Finkel chain enough spells together to get there? And that's a maximized velocity. That's 2 spells in 1. So you can jumpstart the Radical Idea, discarding the Arclight Phoenix, then maximize velocity, the Arclight Phoenix in play twice, and that will do it. Now, there is a consideration. What if Rob had a removal spell? But Jon's going to go, wait, if Rob had a removal spell, Rob would have just gone for lethal. So I think here, Jon is just going to essentially jumpstart this Radical Idea, discarding Arclight Phoenix, no matter what is drawn, maximize velocity. Although, you know, with a Drake, you can also send that thing in.
Yeah, a bit of an unfortunate draw there. We can see that Bassano with plenty more lands in hand. Game 1, he was a little shy on lands. Game 2, well, they were not at all bashful about coming along to help him out. Crackling Drake can also get hit by maximized velocity. Let me count the ways that I can win this game, says Jon Finkel. He casts enough spells that he's getting back a lot of copies of Arclight Phoenix. And there's the handshake. Jon Finkel continues his run here, advances from 3-0 with a relatively straightforward looking 4-0 now as he defeats Rob Pisano in our feature match area. Now, of course, as you can see in our feature match area, it's not as if we had just the one match going for you. Oh, no, ladies and gentlemen, we would not leave you hanging like that. We've got plenty more Magic for you, and we are going to get a chance to jump across and see one of our matches on the back table now. We're going to be moving to our back table here and get a chance to see Andrei Trotsky, who is on red-white aggro. He's up against Ari Lax on Selesnya tokens. So now we get a chance to see what the white cards in the format can do. And Leonin Vanguard plus Healer's Hawk, when you've got a Benalash Marshal working on your side as well, that's a big old life swing. You got a lot of damage coming through, but also a fair amount of life gain going on here as we see a History of Benalia coming along from Ari Lax.
Yeah.
The Selesnya tokens list, it's kind of an interesting one. It's one that has the potential to go very, very wide indeed. Though I do wonder whether or not in this particular matchup against red-white aggro, if it's going to be able to move that far around what's going on the other side of things. The red-white list can also pump a lot of threats out on occasion.
Yeah, usually because these are board-centric matchups, it's very important to get on the front foot, so starting is critical. But the edge usually goes to a deck like Selesnya Tokens. The card March of the Multitudes is so powerful, and making that many life-linking creatures undoes so much of the work that the red-white aggro deck would do. So something like March of the Multitudes just undoes everything you've done all game. That's the first one. The second one is just game over.
And, of course, another way that you can potentially get things going, it's been referred to as being somewhat akin to the double Siege Rhino or triple Siege Rhino draw, is when you draw lots of copies of History of Benalia, which is exactly the situation that each of these players has open to them. In this case, we have Trotsky with a couple of copies of History of Benalia in hand. They add up very, very quickly indeed, because Benalash Marshal, also a knight. On the other side of things, though, we talked about March of the Multitudes. Potentially, we're going to see that from Lax. after a sapling migration, that means that he's going to be able to do some big convoking. We've got a real game on our hands here, Eduardo.
Yeah, this is going to be all about jockeying for board. And Andre's just thinking here about whether or not to deploy that Conclave Tribunal onto the History of Benalia, since it's very obvious that Andre will play a history this turn, but it was whether or not to use that Conclave Tribunal attack, and that was what Andres was looking into there.
Okay, a couple of saplings here coming along from sapling migration. So big convokes active. And of course, that History of Benalia threatening to get to its third act this very next turn. Yeah. Knights all round here as both of these players tick up their sagas.
The second History of Benalia in Andre's hand is extremely powerful here, allowing another knight to come into play this turn, and then next turn, and then the next 2 turns allowing huge swings, which will be necessary to outpower Ari Lax's incoming March of the Multitudes for X equals probably 5. So Andres is under a clock to try to get a board that can outvalue Ari. The more damage that Andre can deal here, the easier it will be for him to force Ari to make some bad blocks and lose board and then take over.
Okay.
So relatively large number of untapped permanents here as Andre Trotsky is able to just commit more and more to this battlefield. Legion's Landing coming along as well here. Arilax already having picked up game 1 here, even if things go a little bit south for him in this game 2, still has every potential to take the match here.
I think, though, with that additional land being drawn on Ari's side, this March of the Multitudes also is okay, but not that great versus what is going to be a gigantic set of 5/4 knights pumped by both the Benelish Marshal and the History of Benalia's final chapter.
Yeah, this is a very busy board for Strasky. I mean, you could easily argue that in this game at least, he's the tokens deck. And you can see the look on Ari's face there as he just has to look on at what's going on for the member of the team for the comic book store there.
Yeah.
Strasky, who had a very important match at the end of last season. He ultimately forced our playoff for Player of the Year by defeating Luis Salvato in a top 8 that he ultimately won. And that was kind of what kept him on the hook. He had sort of said that he was maybe going to take a little bit of a break from high-end Magic, but it's pretty hard when you're this good to take too long a break. Andrei Strasky back at the Pro Tour, and he had a reasonable draft and is now looking to convert into a strong, constructed performance.
Right, and here, if you want ever a good indication of how advantaged a player is in a token matchup, whenever one of the players attacks with the card Benelish Marshal, you know they're ahead. Nobody is attacking with that card feeling, I'm okay with this dying in combat. So with Andres deciding to attack with that Benelish Marshal, you know that Andres feels very comfortable with the situation at hand.
And Arilax, one of the sorts of players who, he does wear his heart on his sleeve a little bit while he's playing. He's a pretty talkative player, but you can kind of see that he's not trying to sell a bluff when he's making these faces. This is a tough spot that he finds himself in here. Some big attacks coming through from Strasky. And while there is going to be a potentially fairly large March of the Multitudes here, a defensive march not nearly as exciting as one that you can convert into an offensive threat.
That's definitely correct. Obviously, in this matchup, a defensive march can be really powerful, but only in a situation where the red-white aggro deck isn't somehow having a bunch of 5/4s on the table. When it's a few 1/1s or 2/1s or 2/2s or that kind of stat, that's fine. Those are easy trades to make. But once they start being this gigantic, you're just chump blocking, and that's not advancing your game plan.
March of the Multitudes there. A lot of creatures in the artwork for that multitude, including little Fibblethip there, just lurking at the front of the crowd at the bottom. Something to check out if you've got a big enough screen TV while you're checking these things out from home.
The high-definition experience of Ravnica. But yeah, here, Ari deciding to essentially make less tokens than the maximum amount just to make sure to get rid of this Benelish Marshal, because that is going to be the most problematic card on Andre's side. So Ari is putting a lot of resource into making sure this Marshal dies. Oh, wow, Pride of the Conquerors. We're packing it up very soon, I believe, here.
Instant speed pump, and there's easily a City's Blessing involved here for Andrei Strasky. So this is +2/+2 for all of his creatures until the end of turn. And considering all of the other pump that's going on as well here, it may not be actually lethal given the amount of lifelink that Arilax has going for him. But look at these boards at this state. We have everything going on for Trotsky and just a lone set of saplings alongside that soldier, a few lands to work with, and I don't think there's going to be much that Arilax can do to get himself out of this and to avoid having to go to a game 3 here.
Yeah, essentially, I think here, Ari drew another land and we're good, but it would have to be an amazing draw to kind of take over this game.
Trotsky there, we can see he's played 18 Pro Tours, got 2 top 8s in it, which is a pretty great win percentage when you get right down to things at the Pro Tour. And at just 23 years of age, one of the more decorated players from the Czech Republic. Big smiles on his face as he is able to get to that game 3. I mean, honestly, when you draw the second copy of History Benalia, when you've already got a Benelish Marshal working for you, these are the games where you could, like, well, if I don't win this game, what am I doing here? How am I winning a Pro Tour if I can't find a way of leveraging these powerful spells? We can see our feature match area, other matches still going on here. This is the sort of format where there are some decks that are pretty explosive, but at the same time, we can have these slightly more drawn-out games. There's kind of something for everyone in this format in that regard. You can be very aggressive. There are certainly control decks that are worth a look, and we'll get a chance to see, I'm sure, a little bit of all of them as this weekend progresses. Yuya Watanabe is in our feature match area. You can see him there. He's up against Mark Jacobson, and we may get a chance to see a little bit of him later on. But at the moment, it looks like we're just moving a couple of bits around here.
Yeah, that's true. Not always bad.
Yeah. By the way, this kind of white mirror is going to be a hallmark side of this weekend because people going in were worried about the aggressive Sacred Foundry decks. So at that point, you're trying to outposition, and Ari clearly playing this green-white tokens list to try to get an edge in these white mirrors.
Well, I mean, it works out that in terms of at least Magic Online, I believe that the top standard trophy holder has been playing quite a bit of Selesnya. This format has a lot of different options, and I'm really intrigued to see how people have figured out their last 5, 6, 10 cards in their deck, which that's the point where you really start thinking about the metagame rather than simply what your deck needs to do to win the game. The small adjustments that say, well, am I expecting lots of the mirror? Am I expecting lots of green-black? Am I expecting lots of various other decks in the format? Even though the format has got a little smaller with the introduction of Guilds of Ravnica in terms of total numbers of cards, there are answers that allow people to kind of pivot and move and adjust to what they expect the metagame to look like.
Yeah, and here, looking at these lists, it's just also maybe your line is just to build the best version of a deck. I think metagaming is definitely something possible after a month. It's been a while since that's been released.
Yeah, we've had a little bit of time for people to get a feel for things, but at the same time, there's not been a crazy amount of standard constructed high-level events where people have been showing off decks too much. We had Grand Prix Lille a couple of weeks ago. That one certainly revealed a few little bits and pieces, and then, of course, New Jersey as well. But one of the stories from both those events to me was there are a lot of decks in this format. This is not a format where there's a clear bogeyman that you need to deal with, that you have a very obvious target that you need to beat. In some respects, yeah, building the very most powerful deck version of any deck that you can might simply be the best plan, and just hope to overrun whatever it is your opponent has going on.
Yeah, one example of that is Trotsky deciding to play Leonin Vanguard. A card that hasn't been so far in many of these white aggressive decks. Most of them preferring Dauntless Bodyguard, even Rustwing Falcon, as we saw yesterday in the Player of the Year playoff. But Leonin Vanguard seen play here and acting as that aggressive one-drop. When you're attacking, making sure that you have that 2 power going in, seen as important.
Yeah, and also the life gain that it represents can be kind of helpful also. If you decide that the format is going to be about a lot of races, then even relatively small incidental life gain can be a big deal here. As these players draw their opening 7s for the deciding game, I can see a couple of different pump options in Arilax's hand. For Andrei Trotsky, though, well, it's a trip to Mulligan Town for him. That smile, just, taking a little breather as he goes down to 6 cards here. Ari perfectly happy to keep on his 7, and that kind of makes sense. Caught a couple of key pump effects that he has going on there. I mean, Venerated Loxodon, for example, if you get the quick start where you get to make some early drops very easily, you cast your Sapling Migration on 2, you get maybe a Legion and Legion's Landing on turn 1, it's not beyond the realms of possibility to get down Venerated Loxodon on turn 3, and when you do that, suddenly your board just looks absolutely terrifying.
Right, and Venerated Loxodon looks much better in Ares' Selesnya deck than it does in Andre's red-white deck. Or, mainly a white deck splashing a few red cards. But the thing is, when you're playing the kind of white aggressive deck that Andre is playing, when you play Venerated Loxodon, you're taking a turn off attacking. And that attacking is sacrosanct to an aggro deck. Telling me that I'm playing an aggressive deck and you have to take off attacking, I need to have a good reason for that. And, Andres is like, no, there's not a good reason. But Ari Lax is more about board position, board control. So making the board, developing it more is the core game plan before finishing the game off in a flourish.
Well, there's some big, powerful cards in this 6-card hand for Andre Stratsky, but just a single land available to him. He's going to have to lean very hard on the creatures that he is going to be able to cast early doors. Sees a land on top, ultimately meaning that mulligan kind of working out all right to him here. Flower, meaning that Arilax easily able to make sure that he hits his land drops okay. Flower Flourish, it seems like a no-brainer inclusion for these Selesnya decks. Early doors, it means that you hit your lands, and if you do end up playing it in late game, a perfectly serviceable pump spell.
Right, like trading a land with Flower, essentially acting as a multicolored tap land, plus late game you get this spell that's very relevant in the deck you're playing, full of tokens. And yeah, it's nice to have your mana base be able to attack for sometimes upward of 10 damage.
Amara Soul of the Accord here. A bear with a fair amount of upside, but a lot of creatures being deployed early doors here from Andre Stratsky. He's able to get the 1-drop turn 1, 2 1-drops on turn 2, and that means that those Leonin Vanguards already gaining him life, getting pumped up a little bit, doing everything that they need to. If he's able to find a third land here, then it'll be just a beautiful start for Stratsky, but not out of the woods yet. Amara Soul of the Accord, attacking in here, generating a creature before trading off, and here comes the first History of Benalia of this Game 3. And in some respects, it's going to be who draws the most of them that is going to be one of the deciding factors in this final game.
Yeah, and that tends to be the case a lot in these white mirrors. A little less here because the approaches of the decks are different. Eri can take over a game without the card, but Andres relies on it a little more for that aggressive push. I find that attack with Amara being very interesting, trading with the Dauntless Bodyguard. It might look like a downgrade, but Eri realizes that having access to just that 1/1 soldier is already being up, and getting rid of that knight before History of Benalia pops seems important.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of cards that you need to double-check the creature types on in this format, because History of Benalia, it doesn't mind about whether or not the knights it's pumping are ones that it has generated, or if they're just other incidental knights, as Sapling Migration comes along here to allow Ari to further broaden his board out. And here's a Venerated Loxodon, tapping a full 5 creatures in order to make sure that the Convoke completely paid by creatures, all of them getting +1/+1 counters. Worth noting that with Guilds of Ravnica, the rules on how Convoke work changed a little bit. You can't overpay, so if you had 12 creatures, you couldn't casually go over the top paying for that Venerated Loxodon. But it generating full value there.
Yeah, Ari deciding to keep the 2 lands untapped. Could have used it to cast the Loxodon, but we want to maximize essentially the amount of counters. But here, that second History of Benalia, that's really the key on Andre's side. That's going to allow to push damage over multiple turns, adding the knight right away and allowing to push that damage down the line.
We know that there's Aurelia, Exemplar of Justice, but 2 cards in hand for on the other side of things. Cleansing Nova could be huge here, but yeah, this is going to be very, very tight. I mean, Cleansing Nova, if there's the 5th land for Ari Lax, he gets to do the suspiciously large attack that kind of has to be taken seriously and blocked to some extent, followed by a big amount of removal here. Or in principle, you could just remove, I guess, both of those histories if you wanted.
Yeah, it's Cleansing Nova looks very strange in a deck full of creatures, but it's exactly for these type of matchups. When Ari's on the draw, being capable of trading off some tokens, gaining time, and then playing Cleansing Nova would lock out the game. But here, you're going to see the second mode, if Ari drew a land, of, well, your 2 histories are gone. That prevents a knight token, and that prevents 2 large attacks. What might happen here is that Cleansing Nova, without that land, since Ari didn't draw the land, Ari may decide, has to figure out what the game plan is. Is the game plan to have this semblance of a race, you know, like we're trying to develop our boards, it's looking this way, this is what I'm trying to accomplish, and then go over the top with a Cleansing Nova? Or is Eri just, I'm just going to develop my board and the Cleansing Nova is only break in case of emergency?
I mean, it's nice to at least have that panic button available to you, and as soon as Lax finds his 5th land, he will be able to work in that direction. In the meantime, though, it's night-on-night action as, well, Andrei Trotsky, he's going to be able to tick up 2 copies of History of Benalia on his turn.
Yeah. The other key moment here is if Eri plays this Loxodon, what are the creatures that get tapped? I think the knights that are free freeze being able to block the ones that are about to be pumped by the 3rd chapter of History of Benalia, it seems okay to leave those at free, except if Andre has a Benalish Marshal. Then at that point, these free frees become outclassed in a really horrifying way, since the opposing creatures would be 5/4s. You could still double block, but yeah. Here, deciding to go for the full effect and keeping those Saprolings as kind of bait.
So the Convoke that Ari has gone for here is making his biggest creatures bigger rather than trying to get everything a little bit larger. And I guess that kind of makes sense when you can see that there's going to be back-to-back copies of History of Benalia getting completed here on the other side of the battlefield.
Yeah, each trade for a Knight token is quite important. A Knight token, when there's no history, has very little value. Simply in a mirror like this, right, a 2/2 Vigilance creature is okay, but it's not really going to do anything when the matchup is so board-centric. But when you have 2 histories ready to pop, that can be a much larger problem.
Dice all around here. Strasky, he's got the Pride of Conquerors in hand, and he will easily be able to hit the City's Blessing here, I believe. 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah. There's the additional permanent that he needed. 1 more Knight. These guys successfully managing to run our feature match area out of Knight tokens. Congratulations on that, guys.
We're going to see many, many Knights over the course of this weekend.
Pride of Conquerors in hand here. Is this going to be the trump card once again for Andrei Strasky?
Yeah, Pride of Conquerors is a card I really enjoy in these kind of board-centric decks. It gives you, essentially, it gives you almost close to an overrun effect at a very cheap mana cost. 2 mana for that type of effect is very cheap. The problem with the card is often when you're trading your creatures, then it loses a lot of its potency, not just because Ascend is harder, but really because you're not pushing for as much damage. You might trade, or your opponent has larger creatures. But in this type of matchup, +2/+2 is a huge boost and might allow Andres to take over. Ari is very aware of the existence of Pride of Conquerors and will try to play at his best around it, trying to make sure that, for example, a Loxodon blocking a Vanguard would only trade with Pride of Conquerors. But these Knights at 4 free already causing quite a problem to Ari.
Yeah, Ari having to very carefully consider what he wants to do in this combat step. Representing Team RIW Hobbies and Games. Ari, to be fair, has been representing Team RIW in some fashion for a very long time, even before the Team Series. But happy to have their name emblazoned on his chest. And he's got to figure out a nice set of blocks here. At 14, it's unlikely that he loses to pump spells here, but this is a fair amount of damage coming through, even with the current board state as it stands.
Yeah, with this block, Pride of Conquerors would have put Ari to 12. So you kind of have to block as many creatures as possible. It's possible. It is possible for Ari to decide to go down to 2, but then any creature going through is lethal. Almost. So that means that Andrej having more creatures than Ari would be enough. To be fair, Ari is just looking to untap with this other swath of large creatures, trying to eat the Vanguards kind of for free here. But a Pride of Conquerors will get rid of these venerated Loxodons, even though the Vanguards will go. And then here, yeah, you can see an interesting overline here of you can see Ari essentially playing around Pride of Conquerors with this block of venerated Loxodon plus the Sapling on a Knight token.
Yeah, these are the kind of double blocks that I don't know if everyone always picks up on when they're figuring out all of the blocking options available. And it may well be that this conservative line for him works out rather nicely, as there is the Pride of Conquerors, there is that City's Blessing, and it means that he's getting at least something out of the carnage that was that combat step. I mean, worth noting, of course, that Ari here, he doesn't even get the opportunity to attack back in quite as decisive a fashion as he might like, because all of those Knights have Vigilance. yes, they're not an exciting size for Andrei Stratsky right now, but he does have bodies that he can put in the way if Lax appears to be threatening some sort of lethal attack here.
The thing to take note here that was important, it looked like a big combat step and that Ari was behind, but you're still trading roughly 3 cards for free, the 2 tokens of the Sapperling Migration, the 2 Venerated Loxodons, for 2 Vanguards and a Pride of Conquerors. Now, these were cheaper for Andre, so that's something to keep in mind. But Ari still got the benefit from both those Venerated Loxodons, and you can see it here in this combat, where Andre has to make some difficult blocks. The free Knight blocked by 2 Knight tokens. The thing is, any Knight token that dies here is hugely advantageous to Ari. Since, again, that means fewer Knight tokens on Andre's side that would be pumped by the History of Benalia.
Ari's also going to be gaining a small amount of life here as he's got a lifelink soldier that's coming in here. Gradually getting a chance to deal a little bit of damage, get a few bits and pieces going here, stay in this game. And he has got that Cleansing Nova in hand as well. And he has the land that means he will be able to cast it post-combat.
Yeah. What's likely to happen in this game? With Andre having access in hand to an Aurelia Exemplar of Justice, that again wasn't cast last turn, Andre preferring the Pride of Conquerors. Andre is probably going to go for Aurelia here. And with Ares board on the Knights, what's going to likely happen is Ares going to have to make a decision on how to block this turn. The attack that's going to come up is probably going to be, I hope not Chump from Andre, but it's looking like at least a Chump. And then that Cleansing Nova might come down, make the game come down to a top deck war.
In terms of top decks, each of these decks can feel a little bit anemic because they're kind of built around generating a large board using a whole bunch of cards rather than having the obvious Windmill Slam threat. So this could end up a little messy here in the later stages. For now, the life total's a little bit around about even. And in terms of opponents on the board, it's not as if there's a gigantic difference between the two, though those extra counters on Knight tokens definitely mattering for Ari Lax here.
Yeah, and here, one of the tokens boosted by Aurelia's ability. So Ari, even though the Knight that blocks would trade essentially here, so that's one less Knight for History of Benalia. With Aurelia being a 2/5 anyways and easily able to block a 4/free, you'll see Ari here deciding to just probably trade for that Knight since it has low value anyway. The big top deck that Ari could have is Tristani Discordant. That is a very powerful card. Many bodies, a pump effect, perfect in a matchup like this.
Conclave Tribunal there. One of the removal options that is also potentially going to make a big impact on this battlefield now. A little under 10 minutes left on the game. It seems unlikely this one's going to finish in a draw. Each of these players swinging for the fences here.
Yeah, and apologies. The Knight Chump block because of the History of Benalia chapter. But yeah, with Conclave Tribunal, Ari basically went, you know what? I have the board advantage. I'm going to press that advantage.
The pickup there. A Legion's Landing for Andrei Stratsky. Yes, it's another body on the board, but not a large body, and it's going to be difficult to transform that Legion's Landing immediately. The Legion's Landing, in principle, in the late game, absolutely fantastic, but I think that it might be a little too late for Stratsky here. The life total's 7-4, and there just needs to be some small blocks here. Andrei Stratsky dropping down to just the 1 point of life here as he sees a Legion's Landing from the other side of things. It could be that this is Ari Lax picking up the win here in round 4, getting his standard assault started exactly as he would have wanted to. There's the handshake. Ari Lax, a former Pro Tour champion, having a pretty reasonable start to his Pro Tour here with Selesnya tokens.
Yeah, Ari essentially getting the matchup he was looking for. When you're playing Selesnya tokens, the white token mirror is exactly what you're looking for. You have more pump effects, more ways to make tokens. You have better board control, and then eventually you can take over the game. That's why Ari only really had that Cleansing Nova post sideboard. It's just 1 or 2 tools necessary, but really the Selesnya deck, if you're looking to beat these kind of red-white tokens deck, that's the deck you want to pick up.
Fantastic stuff. We've had a chance to see the red-blue decks in action. We've had a chance to see the black-green decks in action. And, well, boy, we saw a lot of white in action as well. All of the guilds represented in our tournament here, Pro Tour Guilds of Ravnica. Standard, at least for now, it seems like there are plenty of reasonable options. We'll have chance, of course, get a chance to see plenty more standards soon enough, even if in our feature match area, at least for now, things completed. We'll be able to get you a whole bunch more information about how things are going here at the Pro Tour over at our news desk.